Hey everybody, try and figure out a spot that I can stand so I'm not blocking the screen. Today I'm going to be talking about kayak fishing, primarily kayak bass fishing. My name is Davison. Some of the things I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about my background, different types of kayaks, advantages of kayaks, kayak safety tips, talk some about kayak tournaments, and then I'll try to leave some time at the end for questions. So starting off a little bit about myself, I'm from Columbia, Missouri, and I have a background in fishing out of a bass boat. I fished out of bass boats for over 25 years. My last bass boat was a Ranger Z21. Had it fully decked out with all the big graphs and forward-facing sonar and all the gadgets. And I fished everything from bass clubs. I dabbled in some bigger tournaments like BFLs, Bassmaster Opens. Fished a solo pro series for several years. And in 2020, I started to get interested in kayak fishing. And it was kind of a light bulb deal for me. I was at Pomme de Terre Lake in August of 2020. I was practicing for a solo pro series event, and there was also a Moyak fishing tournament going on with 60 or 80 kayaks at the same time that I was there. And I saw these guys zipping around in these boats, little plastic boats, but they still had the fancy fish finders and electric motors and power poles, and I was totally intrigued by that. And I was struggling. It was August, the water's in the 90s, 13-inch length limit on Pomme de Terre, and I was struggling just to get 5 keepers. And I went home that night and I looked at the results from that Moyak fishing tournament, and a guy named Darian Beadle won that tournament with 93 1/4 inches, which equates in pounds to about 19 pounds. And he caught them way up a river there at Palm, where it's hard to even get a bass boat. And that was a moment when I think in the back of my mind I decided, man, there's really something to this kayak deal. And it wasn't too long after that, you know, all the expenses of owning a bass boat and I just fishing out of a bass boat for so long, I decided it was time for a change, and I just jumped into the kayak world. I sold my bass boat, went to Everhart's, bought an Old Town Autopilot, and I haven't looked back. I've been fishing kayak tournaments for over 2 years now. I'm going into my 3rd season. I had a great year last year, one of the best years I've ever had tournament fishing. I won Angler of the Year in 2 circuits, the All-American Kayak Series and the Moyak Fishing Series. And switching over to a kayak is one of the best things I ever did. So everybody, when they think of kayaks, I know a lot of people think of those guys that are out on the river and they got those kayaks with their helmets on and they're doing barrel rolls and they're going down waterfalls, and that is a type of kayaking, but that's not the type of kayaking that I'm talking about. But those are sit inside kayaks. A lot of them have a sealed cockpit, and that's kind of a different deal. But what I'm talking about, fishing kayaks are primarily sit on top kayaks, and you can see a bunch of them over there at Everhart's. This is the most common type of fishing kayak. They have scupper holes in them to drain the water out of the cockpit if you get water inside. They're wider and more stable to fish out of, and you can paddle these. They have pedal drives where you can use your legs like a bicycle, and they also have motorized versions all the way up to the Old Town Autopilot that has a Minn Kota Ultrex trolling motor in it. So, as I said, the pedal drive is one version, and this gives you some advantages for fishing. You got forward and reverse, gives you better control while you're out there. It's more hands-free fishing than if you were paddling. You have a rudder knob that you can steer with, and there's a lot of guys that fish our tournaments with pedal drives. And there's actually some of the kayak tournaments only allow manpower, and so most of the guys fishing those tournaments have a pedal drive. What I fish out of is a motorized kayak. These have an electric trolling motor integrated into it. We generally use lithium batteries to power those. And some of the advantage of having the motor, it's pretty obvious, but it's less fatigue, and it also allows you to more easily stand up and fish out of the kayak. That Old Town autopilot is amazingly stable. I stand up and fish out of it about 90% of the time, and you can still paddle it obviously, but having that autopilot trolling motor is just amazing. You have the ability to spot lock. You can set a heading, and it will adjust your course for the wind and for current, so to keep you on track. And then there's a lot of other brands of kayaks out there. Some of them, they get mounts to mount a trolling motor on the front, and they even make motors for the back called torpedoes that some guys have those, and you can go up to 7 miles per hour with those on the back of your kayak. And then just other basic types of kayaks. There's touring kayaks. There's guys that like to go out and they just paddle for distance. Those are longer, narrower kayaks. They have tandem kayaks and also inflatable kayaks. We won't really be talking about those too much today. So I'm going to talk about some of the advantages of kayaks, and I'm going to compare them to bass boats. Please don't be offended if you like fishing out of a bass boat. I fished out of a bass boat for a long time, and I have a lot of friends that still do. And kayaking's not for everybody. So if you like your bass boat, that's great. But there are some advantages of kayaks. Compared to bass boats, they're much less expensive. They're less expensive to buy, and they're also less expensive to maintain. They're less expensive to operate. You don't have all that boat gas, oil, insurance, property taxes, gas for your tow vehicle. All of the things involved that make bass boats expensive, kayaks are much cheaper. They're also much easier to transport. You can put them in the back of your truck. Some people put them on top of their cars. I do use a small trailer on mine, but when I'm trailering, my tow vehicle uses no more gas than it does when I'm driving without a trailer. They also take less room to store. They're easier to fit in your garage. You can even put them in a shed. They make lifts that you can hang them from the ceiling in your garage. And one of the big advantages of kayaks is they allow you to get to places you can't go with a bass boat. Whether that's really skinny water, or if that's a pond or a lake that doesn't have a boat ramp, you can easily get in there with a kayak. Kayaks are also much more stealthy. This makes it easier to catch fish. And I don't care how quiet you are in a bass boat, that big bass boat displaces a lot of water. And the fish can feel that coming through the water. A kayak doesn't do that. I've caught a lot of fish that they bite right next to my kayak. They don't even know I'm there. And I fish behind guys in bass boats and catch fish that they don't catch. And I think that's because the fish don't know I'm there. And so that's a big advantage to kayaks. And when I'm fishing out of a kayak, I just feel like I'm a lot more connected to nature. I'm closer to the water. It's quieter when you're out there. You're able to get to remote locations that you don't see as many other boats. And it's just a different feeling while you're out there. And I also feel like it's a lot less intimidating for beginners. It can be overwhelming to somebody new to fishing to get a big, expensive bass boat and to try and fish in a bass tournament. But a kayak is a lot simpler. It's easier to get new people involved, and they can get out on the water so they're not fishing off the bank. And there's just a lot of reasons that it's a lot easier for beginners to get started with a kayak. And I found the kayak community has a completely different vibe to it. The people who kayak fish, they're very friendly. They're welcoming to new people, and they're eager to share information. So it's a great thing to get involved in, to make new friends, find people with common interests, and just get out on the water and spend time. So it would be irresponsible for me to talk about kayaking without going over some basic safety information. First, always, you must wear a PFD or a life jacket while you're out on the water. This is especially important if you're kayaking. In our kayak tournaments, we're required to have a life jacket on 100% of the time, and that's very important. A lot of people die, especially kayakers that might flip over in remote areas, cold water, or maybe just bump their head or whatever. So it's always important to wear a life jacket. And it's also important to tie down anything to the boat that you don't want to lose. This includes your rods, your phone, your paddle, anything. When you're out on the water, stuff can happen quickly. So anything you don't want to lose, make sure you secure it. It's also a good idea to use a buddy system while you're out there, especially if you're new or if you're in a remote area by yourself. It's always good to have a buddy there with you in case you get in trouble. And then in the wintertime or colder months, it's important to carry a dry bag with you with a full change of clothes so that if you do go in the water, hypothermia can happen really fast and you get out of the water, you want to be able to put dry clothes on. So, and you always want to be prepared with a plan. It's a good idea to get out there in your kayak when it's not so cold and flip it over and practice getting back in, figure out what's going to happen and what to do. So if it ever does happen, you'll be prepared. And don't forget about sun protection. It doesn't just mean on sunny days in the summer, even on cloudy days, even in the wintertime. Cover yourself up, use a sun buff, sunscreen, gloves, long sleeve shirts. It's all very important to prevent skin cancer. So now I'm going to talk specifically about kayak bass tournaments. We're very fortunate here in Missouri. We have a lot of options and a lot of great lakes for kayak fishing. I want to talk about how kayak bass tournaments work. I want to talk about different types of bass tournaments, kayak bass tournaments that are out there, and also some of the 2023 schedules that I'm involved with. So obviously this is different than a bass boat. We don't have a live well, so we're not bringing fish in. We do what's called catch, photo, release. Basically, we have an official measuring board. You put the fish on the board and you take a picture of it. And we go by length instead of weight. And then we also have an app called TourneyX that we use on our phone. And when we take that picture, we upload the photo to the app, and it keeps track of everybody's biggest 5 fish by length. And that's one of the cool things is you can actually go on there and you can see how other guys are doing in the tournament in real time. And also it's good for people at home, like your family or friends. They can log on to TourneyX and they can see how you're doing in the tournament. So that's a pretty cool aspect of it. Another unique part of kayak tournaments is you can launch from any public access. So you don't have everybody launching from one boat ramp. Guys can spread out around the lake as long as it's public. You can launch there, and you can get to areas that you wouldn't normally be able to get to in a bass boat. We have official launch time, and then usually at 30 minutes after that is lines in, so you have 30 minutes to get to your spot. And then we have a lines out time where you stop fishing, and then we have a photo submission deadline. And that's usually an hour, hour and a half after the tournament's over. And the reason for that is sometimes you don't have a good cell phone signal while you're out there, so this allows you time to get to where you have service so you can get your photos uploaded. So here's a couple of shots of the TourneyX app on my phone. Like I said before, this automatically tracks each person's biggest 5 fish by length. And the photos use a GPS tag and a date and time stamp that's embedded in the photos. I mean, this helps prevent phishing. This it helps prevent cheating, and it allows the tournament director to see where everybody caught their fish at and when they caught it, so he can verify everything. And as I said, you can keep track of how everybody's doing in the tournament in real time. So it's kind of like MLF in that way, is that you kind of have an idea how everybody's doing. If everybody's catching them and you're not catching any, you know you need to do something different. So there's several different levels of tournaments in the kayak bass fishing world. And at the local level here in Missouri, we have a club called Moyak Fishing Series. And Moyak is one of the biggest kayak fishing clubs in the country. And Joshua Booth is over there in the Everhart's booth. He's the tournament director. And if you guys have questions afterwards, you can come talk to me or you can come talk to Joshua. But some of the advantage of the local tournaments is it allows you to compete close to home. You're not having to make super long drives to tournaments. You can fish the local lakes that you're familiar with. And these are primarily one-day events. They have lower entry fees, and they have a lot of different ways that you can compete in the club. You can compete as an individual, and you can compete with a partner as well, and you can do both at the same time. So you can still have the fun of having, that's my partner right there, Chris Robs. He's a hammer. But you get the fun of the different types of tournaments like you would in a bass boat. You can have a buddy tournament. You can have the individual event. And then we also have online monthly events. This is great for people who are not maybe as comfortable jumping right into a live tournament. You can fish any body of water that's public in the state, and you have all month to catch your biggest 5 fish. So if you have a rigorous work schedule or whatever that doesn't allow you to fish the tournaments on the weekends, you can fish wherever and whenever it works for you. And these tournaments can actually be pretty competitive. It's not uncommon. It usually takes 105 to 110 inches to win some of these tournaments. And it's really cool, though, to be able to fish those little conservation areas that are close to home and try and catch some big fish. And then we also have a river series event in Moyak that they break down the state into sections. And if you like fishing the moving water, like the Gasconade River, the Current River, or any of those moving bodies of water like that, the river series is for you. And that's a great opportunity to get out in the summertime. You can do a float with a buddy and compete in a tournament. Kind of a step up from that is a trail called the All-American Kayak Series. This is a regional event. It's almost really a national event. We call it a regional event. It's all over the Midwest. And these have higher entry fees and also higher payouts. They're multiple day events. Most of these are Friday, Saturday events. And this allows you to get outside the state and start fishing different types of water and compete against guys from other states. So it's a higher level of competition. But most of the lakes in this series, for Missouri people, most of the lakes are within an 8-hour drive. So they're not terrible drives. You're not driving all the way across the country. And but it still allows you to fish some different lakes. In 23, we got tournaments in Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, in Kansas. So quite a variety of lakes there. And that tournament series is also ran by Joshua Booth. He does a really great job running our tournaments. And the All-American Kayak Series is rapidly growing. And it's really catering to those guys in the Midwest that get overlooked a little bit on some of the national series that kind of tend to focus on the southeast part of the country. But then talking about those national tournaments, and I'm going to be fishing these this year, they have the Bassmaster Kayak Series. This is the highest level of our sport. It's one of the cool things about kayak fishing is I would never be able to qualify for the Bassmaster Classic. That's probably never going to happen. But I can get into kayak fishing, and it's very obtainable. I've qualified the last 2 years to fish the Bassmaster National Championship, which is basically the Bassmaster Classic of kayak fishing, and it is held in conjunction with the Bassmaster Classic. So if you are able to finish in the top 10 of that event, you get your award on the Bassmaster Classic stage, which is really cool. These also offer higher entry fees and higher payouts, but the travel can be extensive on these. You can see we got Alabama, South Carolina, Texas, Wisconsin, and then the last one, which they have just announced, is the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania. So it's going to be quite a bit of driving. But if you want to fish with the best, this is how you do it. So some of my favorite things about kayak tournaments, and I've talked about this a little bit already, but I really enjoy going to new places to fish. When I was in a bass boat, I never did that. I kind of stuck to Missouri. It was intimidating for me to drag my bass boat across the country. It was expensive to do that, and go to a lake that I don't know, or maybe like, for example, La Crosse, Wisconsin is one of my favorite places to go now. That's where I caught that big northern pike. And I would be very intimidated to take a bass boat up there if I didn't know my way around. But going out there with a kayak is no big deal. You don't have to worry about hitting something, and you can just launch and go fishing. And so this has afforded me the comfort level to be able to do that. And something else I really like about kayak fishing that's different from the bass boat tournaments is when you catch a fish, you take a picture and then you let it go right where you caught it. You're not putting it in a live well and dragging it across the lake, letting all the fish go in one spot, relocating the fish all over the lake. In kayak tournaments, we catch a fish and we let it go right where we caught it, and it's going to be there for the next guy. And I think that's better for the future of the sport. One of the other things that I really like about kayak tournaments is the mornings before launch are totally different. It's not unusual for me to pull up to the boat ramp I'm going to launch, and maybe I'm the only person there, or there might just be a few people there, and I can get my boat ready and get on the water, and it's very peaceful and quiet. I can hear the fish jumping, versus a bass boat tournament where you got 100 or 150 boats. Everybody's hollering. There's a lot of commotion. It's kind of stressful. There's that smell of two-cycle oil in the air. Some people love that, but I kind of like being out there by myself, quiet, and I can just think about the day. And I like the fact that I'm able to fish at the highest level of the sport in kayak fishing. The kayak world is much smaller than the bass boat world, and you can fish the Bassmaster tournaments at the highest level. It's very obtainable for just an average fisherman. So that's basically everything I had prepared. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has specific questions about kayak fishing. I'm also going to be hanging out around the Everhart's booth the rest of the day, so if you're interested or there's something you'd like to talk about, please feel free to hit me up, and I'd be glad to help you out however I can. But do we have any questions? So, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.